But the deadly innocent ones are the ones that are doing intense damage, and I would give them the idea of innocent fraud is you're giving them calling them innocent is more damning than not innocent, because if they know this, it's I don't know, but you say it's so simple to call them dumb enough to not understand what they're doing. So anyway, that came from Jonathan with wonderful spenders of fraud. I picked up. Okay, so the innocent frauds have a myth and a reality. The myth is fraud. And the myth is that raising interest rates works to slow the economy, increase unemployment, and bring down inflation. And as you heard from Randy, that was their intention when they started raising rates. Okay, reducing interest rates works to support the economy, reduce unemployment, and increase inflation, as Japan has been trying to do for 30 years. Okay, that's supposed to work that way. And this is driving policy. It's believed, it's in textbooks, it's, Federal Reserve research. This is what they conclude, this is what they do, and this is the way they conduct policy. And so let me get into it, and remind me if I don't tell you the reason it's so damaging at the end. Okay, number one, the Fed has it backwards. And I'll say they don't know they have it backwards. We might be suspecting now, after many of you and others have been bombarding social media with the idea that you've got it backwards. And because of all you doing that, I managed to get a Bloomberg interview with Ron Watts, which guy's been avoiding me for, 8 or 10 years. But I guess the social pressure person. Rate increases cause deficit spending to increase and support the economy, reduce unemployment, and support prices. Okay, it's pretty obvious, right? And they're just like a complete denial. Now, if you look at how much, anyway, cutting rates is in fact actually reduces government deficit spending, which reduces economic growth, employment, and price pressure. Okay, so I actually have been onto this for a while, but debt to GDP has been lower. It's been about 35%. It went up to 100%. This debt held by the public, the COVID, and that changed the dynamics that Brandon touched on. That the idea is it's in all in mechanical models. If the debt gets high enough, the interest becomes that kind of problem, where then rate hikes are no longer anti-inflation. What happens when the Fed hikes interest rates? The only thing that changes is the Fed and the Treasury pay more interest to the economy. Okay, the Fed pays more interest on reserves and reverse repurchase accounts. These are there because of their quantitative easing, where they went out and bought securities. They have some anyway, but and that built those numbers up to trillions where before it was trivial. So when you look at total government deficit spending, on a functional level, include the net spending by the Fed. And I don't know, the CBO didn't used to do that. So that's it. Do you know, is the CBO now including that in their deficit?
Well, there's remittances. They show.
Yeah. Do they count that as part of the deficit?
Yes.
Okay. So they just came out with a 7% number for the deficit, US deficit now. So I think that probably includes the Fed payments. Otherwise, they would have had 6.5%. The Treasury pays more interest on new securities than issues. Those are called Treasury bills, notes, and bonds. So every week, the Treasury is selling new Treasury bills. The old ones mature. At least for the first year, for the first couple of years, the new bills were issued at higher interest rates, higher interest expense than the ones that mature. So the interest expense is going up as the old debt rolls off and the new debt is put on. Those are pretty fast. So the whole bill portfolio doesn't go longer than a year. First year rates weren't all the way up to 1.5%, but then gone continuously, and that number has gone up continuously. And it'll continue to go up. I think the duration is about 4 years of the Treasury portfolio, which means, on average, it would take 4 years for the whole 28 trillion in turnover. But the Fed owns a lot of them and pays interest, overnight term. So that loss has been recognized as shows up this debt. It's deficit spending. And in the financial markets, if you've got a security that's a free yield at 3%, you're a pension fund. And you know that when it comes due 6 months from now or a year from now, the new investment rate is 4% or 5%. That is already factored into your, assumptions of what you have to do on your asset side. So even though the interest rate, the average rate paid last year was maybe 3.4 or something like that, the markets discount the fact that they're going to be getting higher rates later. The financial markets. Now that's not everybody, so it's only a partial effect. So the effect is a little bit higher. And the rate increases are not done in conjunction with offsetting tax increases. The increase in government interest expense is all new deficit spending. You never see the Fed say, we're raising rates and we're going to increase taxes. They just raise rates, the government pays more, the deficit goes up, period. In short, Fed and rate hikes continuously flood the economy with new money. There I did I use the word money? So, new balances at the Fed. It's reserves, it's securities. Okay, this is a very casual presentation. Meant for general audience, so the big companies do. They're flooding the economy with money. Okay? And what I'm saying is they're throwing kerosene on the fire and not water on the fire. They're drilling holes in the boat to let the water out. Oh, here's the interest expense, and that's annualized. So the new rates, annualized from last month, that was the end of the quarter, so it's a little bit old. Like $1.2 trillion. And GDP is 28 trillion over the public, so that's 4%, pushing 4%. Territory is, new territory. Here's the debt to GDP I was talking about. So back before 2008, they were somewhere around 35%. And that now it's up to 97 point. But that was the end of the quarter, 379. I don't know if it's gone up a little or down. It's way up. It's about a triple what it was. So if the debt to GDP had been where it was then, they'd only be paying interest on 10 trillion instead of 9 trillion. And the interest expense would be a lot lower and it would be less of a factor. However, even back when Chairman Bernanke cut rates in 2009, in 2008, my concern was that cut in rates, they cut $400 billion of interest income out of government spending. Okay, and so that was working against their stimulus, which was trying to, deficit spend to add spending. So here we had $400 billion drag from the rate cuts. And it's interesting. I was at a Fed meeting with my partner Korean, and a research guy at the Fed, his name was David Wilcox. We're talking about quantitative easing. Treasury was buying securities. This was before the rate cuts. No, it was right after the rate cuts. And he was talking about how, whether it be inflation or not. I said, look, I'm not so much interested in that. Is that when you buy these securities at 4 or 5%, and you're paying zero on reserves at the time, you already cut rates, you're eliminating interest income from the economy. You just cut the economy's income by $90 billion a year with this rate cut. And we're having a very, professional conversation with reasonable, normal voice. All of a sudden, it was like this guy was hit with an electric shock. And he goes, gets like defensive. I've never seen anybody in government with it. He goes, look, we only have one lever, and it's interest rates, and we believe lower rates are easing, and we're not going to discuss it. Sorry, I asked the question about what we got to be doing. Okay, so they must have been having some kind of a discussion behind it, I guess. I don't know. So anyway, now the debt to GDP is way up there. So back then, if you increase rates 1%, that would be at interest income of maybe 0.35% of GDP after everything's discounted and worked out ultimately. And today, rates 1% increase is going to increase it by almost 1%, a full percentage of GDP. So now it has 3 times the fiscal impact it had then. And I was concerned about it then. I was concerned about it before that. I did my first paper on rates back in 96 or 97 called The Natural rate of interest is talking about how this interest income effect is enough. And I started in financial markets in the 1970s. And even when Volcker was doing what he was doing, I was thinking that the debt to GDP, even at low levels, was supplying enough interest income to reverse the effects that they were trying to achieve. And that the effects on the economy were from the deficit spending and not from the change in interest rates. Even then, so Volcker's, my narrative is not that Volcker's rate hikes caused the crash. It's that Volcker's rate hikes caused inflation to be where it was. It supported where it was anybody. We had oil price increase at the time. Inflation was running, and I'm just giving you a very round number, 12%, and the deficit was 6%. So adjusted for inflation, the deficit was, we're running a surplus. Okay, and so if you look at the public debt, in real terms, it was going down. That doesn't happen very often. It normally happens in front of a crash like we had in 1917 and 1980. So I associated that crash even back then with the drop, with fiscal shock. Now, the interest rates helped to support by helping me keep the inflation up, so the real value of the public debt went down. Anyway, a little bit of a historical sideshow. So interest on the federal debt, 96% GDP, 3 times higher in the life cycle. The rate increases and increased interest expense, 3 times the fiscal impact in prior periods, which even then I thought the impact was more than sufficient to have this kind of effect. So about 2.5 years ago when they first started raising rates, I wanted to wait to see how data works. I came out proactively ahead of time saying, this is nuts, okay? We're 3 times the impact of the last one, and the data on the last one's pretty borderline. It looks like it probably was working backwards then as well. And certainly in the rate cuts, it looked like it was working backwards because things were slowing down. And in Japan, with the 0 rates, it didn't have any effect, okay? And there was, I heard there was one other investor in room here who was looking at the same thing, but it was a pretty lonely position to have. And, okay. So now let's get to the fundamentals of how monetary policy is supposed to work. In the economy, okay, not including in government, for every dollar borrowed, there's a dollar saved. You look at a bank balance sheet, they have loans and deposits. Okay, if you do it at an individual level, somebody owes you money, interest rates go up or down, that affects how much he gains and you lose, or you lose and he gains, right? This would only slow the economy if the borrowers cut their spending more than the savers increase their spending. So in the economy without government, for every dollar borrowed, there's a dollar saved. When you raise rates, all you're doing is transferring income away from borrowers towards savers. That's supposed to have a profound effect on the economy because it's presumed that borrowers are a lot more sensitive to that. And they're going to get cut out and stop spending, which is what GDP is. And the savers who get the extra money, they're probably not going to spend nearly as much as the borrowers are going to cut back because people who are interested, right? Foreigners, pension funds, and places that don't spend their income. So there's a presumption that this difference is enough to have a big effect on the economy. So raise rates and slows the economy down. So there's a guy who used to work at the Fed, I used to visit, named Steve Holman, and he was in operations. And one of his jobs was to look at this to see what these differences are in propensities to spend income. So what difference is there between borrowers and savers? I asked him, how much, well, he says, well, look, our position is that there is a difference and that raising rates is going to slow things down because it will hurt the borrowers more than it will help the savers. But I've been doing the econometrics now, for 20 years. I haven't been able to detect it in a day. So, and okay, studies. That's a word for I talk to Steve. That's what I'm doing. Studies show this is a small factor. It's dwarfed by the enormous amount of new interest. Here's the other problem, or this maybe the biggest problem. Rate hikes are obscenely regressive. Interest payments only go to people who already have money, obviously, right? And it's in proportion to how much you already have. So the more you have, the more you get. Okay. Fed rate hikes have caused the government to spend trillions of dollars on interest only for people who already have money in proportion to how much they already have. What kind of government policy is this? And Reagan would have blushed if he suggested this to him. As Dasher, remember where I call it basic income for people who already have money. Now, there's some basic income proponents here, but how many of them favor giving income only to people who already have money in proportion to how much they already have? Like none. All right, so this is like off the charts, as they say, this policy for anybody. Okay, what could be more obscenely regressive? And the Fed decides to do this on its own to fight inflation. There's no congressional vote. So you got these guys at the Fed and the Bank of England, whatever, saying, all right, we've got an inflation problem. Here's what we're going to do. We're going to give people who already have money a lot more money in proportion to how much they have, until this inflation goes away. And if it doesn't go away, we're going to keep giving them more. All right? So it's funny, except this is happening. This is real world stuff. This is not like some theory. This is what they're doing. Okay. So I was in Argentina visiting, was it 2 years ago? Visiting August, and I met with this guy's the central bank because they had inflation at 25%, I think. My numbers might be off on that. And they raised rates at 30%. I wrote this thing, which you get on my website. It shows that, and I was saying that the same thing. This was in the paper about that was causing the inflation. And they were doing this pretty much because the IMF was demanding it, keeping a real rate. You have to keep the interest rate higher than the inflation rate to fight inflation. And I went through, so I meet this guy at the central bank, I don't remember his name. He goes, hi, you don't have to introduce yourself. I've been reading your stuff for 10 years now. So that was kind of nice. So I go through this stuff, and he had somebody else there with him, one of the associates, and he says, oh yeah, Sergeant Wallace or somebody who comes find out, said this in 1987. So we understand this, but we can't do anything besides it was this guy Guzman or something, maybe central finance minister, maybe they were all like part of it. They liked the arrangement for some reason. I guess because they got a lot of good money for foreign exchange. So anyway, so I leave the meeting and he's got all the information. He knows all of this. And in the next 2 years, inflation goes to 35, so they raise rates to 40. Okay, inflation goes to 50, so they raise rates to 60. Inflation goes to 70, so they raise rates to 80. Okay, how does this end? Inflation goes to 100, they're at 110. They're up to 200%. And then this guy with a chainsaw wins an election. And then they cut rates to only 40. But, okay, so how much were they deficit spending with rates at 100%? I can figure that out. Their debt to GDP is only 40%. Well, that means they're spending 40% of GDP to pay interest. This is nuts. And it goes to people who already have money, who have all the pesos they want. They sell it in the foreign exchange market. Peso goes down, so they get more inflation, so they get more interest. This thing goes on for years until a guy with a chainsaw takes over. And he's got rates down to 40%, which still isn't enough, and so the inflation's still going away. I don't know what the next step is going to be. And they did that in Turkey, and guys get thrown out or down, and the next time raise rates again. So the thing is, where does it end in the United States? Right now, we think we're in a slow spot where the Fed's going to cut rates. And maybe they are. Maybe I'm wrong, which is great. I'm 75 this year. I could just prolong the little hole and go like, and get out of my life. But I think there's a pretty good chance the 7% deficit, this thing is just kind of some kind of statistical soft spot. Because unemployment claims are down to 220,000, they're like record lows, and they've gone up to 240, which is still record low, but they went up 20%, then they came right back down. Yeah, unemployment rate is now reported that gone up from 3.5 to 4.1 over 6 months, which is a certain percentage. It's still hovering on what would have been 50-year lows, and it's based on this household survey that's very small, no participation, and they're trying to get rid of it, defund it. It might be right. But the establishment survey, which is much larger, it shows the job growth. If you use that for the employment sort of numbers, you still get about 3.8. But they're seeing it go up, which is okay. And the Fed is talking, and they want to keep them on the low rates, then maybe they will. Now, if they do lower rates, they're not going to lower interest expense because it's still catching up from where it was. Because there's still securities maturing and rolling over and everything else. And the average rate paid by the Treasury was only like 3.25, 3.3 last year, $1 trillion on 28 trillion. So that, even if they do that, rates will keep going up, and the CBO is predicting the deficits to go up. Now, what's interesting is that rates are 4% of the 7% deficit, but that 3% is helping a lot. That's still very large for a pro-cyclical deficit. One of the largest ones we've had after the 2-year extension. Tax revenues have not been going up, a little bit, but they're pretty flat. They're always not, under estimates of what tax revenue, because as Randy pointed out, the economy grows, the tax revenues grow even faster than the government can spend money. Deficit goes down, though, if it crashes. Might take a few years, but that's the process. This time these tax revenues aren't, I don't know why. I can guess that it's got something to do with these tax credits that they're giving for energy investments. Because those things are open-ended. It's not like, oh, we've got 100 billion limit or 40 billion limit. They're unlimited. Okay, and what do I read? I see these charts going straight up of new solar and wind being deployed everywhere, which is fine, the cost, but it's gone nuts. And then, personally, I just put up solar in one of my rental buildings I have, and now I won't have to pay any taxes next year. It's a 40% tax credit for buying solar stuff for your house. I buy a car and I plug it into the house as a solar battery, I get a 40% discount on my car. So there's all these open-ended tax credits are going on, and probably a lot of other things. I had a friend work for an accounting company, accounting firm. And I said, is anybody else doing this? He said, oh yeah, all our clients do. We have is what used to be called tax shelters, where they invest $100,000 and they get a $40,000 tax credit. It goes into solar for some building somewhere. I said, are you doing a lot of them? He goes, oh yeah, everybody's tax return I do. What about the other firms? Yeah, it's really competitive. All the firms are doing the same. I don't know. It's just anecdotal information. But tax revenues have not been going up. It's another automatic stabilizer that's been disabled. Transfer payments are not going up because unemployment's low. It's not going up. So this deficit keeps going. All right, so where are we? The entire financial community believes increasing the government's deficit spending. It was like I
understood the points.
made a typographical error. So throwing trillions of dollars of interest payments to people who already have, oh, I see, it reads as one sentence. The Fed, Congress, the entire community believes that increasing government's deficit spending by throwing trillions of dollars of interest payments to people who already have money fights inflation by causing unemployment to go up and the economy to slow down. That's why we've been forecasting recession ever since the COVID started. The rate increases, which is true. But monetary policy works for the lag. It was 6 months to a year, it became 18 months, and 2 years. Now it's finally kicking in because of these numbers. So maybe it does. Okay, Japan has been saying monetary policy works with a lag. It had 0 rates, 30 years. They say we just need a little more time. And so did the Central ECB. We just need a little more time after 10 years of 0 rates. Okay. What's been happening with the economy? The economy has been booming, relatively speaking. 3% type of growth is not real growth. Unemployment near 50-year lows, even after these increases. It's a high percentage increase. It's enough to cause the Fed to worry about it spiraling out of control. And they may cut rates in September. Ever since the economy is defined as fear-mongering and rapidly growing. Okay, growth is now only 2% this quarter. First quarter was only 1.45 because firms didn't build inventory. They let their inventories run down because they were watching all these forecasts. And now they're going to rebuild them, and I think it's going to come back. I could be wrong. Inflation indicators spiked due to COVID disruptions, and the oil price spiked from the Ukraine war. Oil went up to like 120, remember, early on. And so everything else goes up. It fertilizes made out of oil, right? So food prices go up, surprise. Shipping charges, everything goes up. Okay. And then as some kind of unholy deal was made with the Saudis. I remember where that probably was, and how that worked. But prices came down, and they've been kind of flatlining sideways ever since. Inflation indicators is what I call them. It's not really inflation, but what we call inflation indicators. They went up, came down, and now they've gone sideways for the last 3 or 4 months. Slight down tilt to them. Okay, we won, let's cut interest rates. Maybe they were. Okay. Fed still thinks the rate hikes are restrictive and just need a little more time to create a slowdown. And they now think they may have already done it. Okay, here's the latest inflation numbers. This change from the previous year. Inflation shot up. July 22 was the peak in oil prices. Surprise? That CPI 17 is like the same minute. Okay? Comes down now. I don't know, I guess if you have enough analytical tools, this becomes a sharp decline. It looks to me a lot like you could say it's still going sideways. I'm not saying it's not going to go down to right to their target or anything, but oil prices stopped going down and now they've actually started to go up a little bit. 86 for Brent last I saw. The Fed has backwards. It responded to high inflation indicators, low unemployment, with rate hikes. Rate hikes made unemployment go lower, and inflation indicators went higher, up to the line. When the Fed saw that, they hiked again. It continued to raise rates as they saw their inflation going up. The spiral continues with no end in sight if they don't see the error of their ways and reverse course. But that might be right or wrong. We will know probably in the next 3 to 6 months. If that turns out to be correct, and we are on the path of us strip of Argentina, we are now chasing our tails on the way out, as they will raise rates again and the inflation numbers flatten from here, from that sharp downturn we saw, and it starts to drift up a little bit. That's going to happen, and then I don't know how it is. Or if we get lucky, some other deflationary shock, like a collapse in oil prices, may cause them to cut rates and stimulate the economy, which doesn't work either. What's the answer? The Fed should cut its policy rate back to 0. It's a budget cut of over $1 trillion a year. This is $20 trillion scored for deficit reduction by the CBO. And it's the low-hanging fruit for deficit reduction. Where are all these fiscal hawks when you need them? They're gone. They're nowhere in sight. And now that's going to be too much of a cut, of course, so the economy will slow down. So now you can add back in public spending for public education and health and anything else you want, or defense if you're right. It gives you huge fiscal stimulus. Upward pressure is removed from the inflation indicator. I've observed, I'm not going to say any more because like this, that the inflation rate tends to hover around the interest rate. So when you raise rates to 5%, like we have 5.5%, the inflation rate is going to creep up towards the 5.5% to the Fed funds rate over time. I've just seen that over my 50 years of watching it happen every time. It's a different presentation. It's partially this interest expense. It's also forward pricing, and it's also but I just observed that. So it wouldn't surprise me to see these inflation indicators creeping back up over time. And in fact, the last wholesale price number that came out Friday started moving back up again. Upward pressure is removed from the inflation indicators so they can settle back to where they were before the COVID crisis. Prices, I want to say, because rates back to 0, they can go back to where they were when rates were 0. If we leave rates high, you're going to settle back to the interest rate of today, which is 5.5%, not back to the 0% pre-COVID rate. Postscript. That was it. That's it. How's my time?
We've got about 12 minutes for some questions. Okay.
Thanks for that, Warren.
the Fed has mortgage-backed securities and treasuries. They get interest from the Treasury, interest payments, and then they remit back to the Treasury. Now, because they're paying interest on reserves, they're actually have negative.
Yeah, that's called remittance.
Right.
They're negative. Yeah, that's deficit spending.
But is that measured in when I look at the Treasury daily Treasury statements?
Yeah.
That's not in there.
Yeah, Stephanie, we talked about this, and she talked to the CBO, and
No, it's straight on the it's on the CBO's, it's on the CBO's budget outlook. So you have expenditures and revenues, and remittances to federal revenues. But when remittances go to zero, you just see zeros in all of those future years, as long as.
on down was negative.
Well, they do go negative.
Yeah.
They go to zero and below.
They're saying
zero.
that.
So when you look at the long term, what they're doing is saying revenues are going to be down by this much because remittances have disappeared. And so that increases the deficit. And then it also adds to the deficit in the expenditure account because the government itself is paying out. That's on the expenditure side, they add on the revenue side, both increase the deficit.
So are we saying that monetary policy is fiscal policy?
It's hijacked for
Right. Changing the interest rates alters fiscal balance, for sure. Raise rates are increasing government spending by that.
Question.
I call it the fiscal impact of their monetary policy.
Just in a situation where you had a 0% interest policy and a drop into income, just so looking at from what Ryan's graphs showing that an increase in deficit or surplus is an indication of oncoming recession.
Yeah.
Should an anything government doing about it, in particular because if supply does collapse, like we're storing future inflation, or you just leave it and let it drop out to the
Okay, so right now the deficit's 7% of GDP. And the other thing is, look, one of the arguments I got, which was also not necessarily wrong, is that 4% on interest doesn't count. In fact, for the IMF, when they look at the deficit of Argentina, it looks at the primary deficit. You can't even find the interest expense in a report. You got maybe it's at the end of the report somewhere, but it's always hard to find. And the idea is that nobody ever spends interest income. You don't sell it for foreign exchange, you don't do anything, it just piles up into whoever got it. There's a zero propensity to spend income. And I think that's like, at least was in the Fed models. So as they were raising rates and all this income was going out, they were modeling the idea that it would not, none of it would get spent. And if none of it would have gotten spent, their forecast would have been right. We would have gone into recession. Okay, because there wasn't enough deficit spending away from them, I didn't think, to keep us going. But with this extra 4%, even if guy Mike Green said he did work on it, he's pretty good. He thought at least like half was getting spent. Well, okay, so that would mean that effective deficit instead of 7% is 5%. It's still way up there. These are orders of magnitude up there. The other thing is, you have to look at the real deficit spending adjusted for inflation, because people's savings, as one presentation pointed out, no, it was the Italian one thing, is your savings in real GDP, is in real dollars. Because if prices doubled, everybody needs to have twice as much funding to operate, twice as much cash, twice as much in reserves. And so with the inflation rate coming down, like in that chart, the real deficit after inflation is going up. Now, the Fed's looking at it as saying the real restriction is increasing. We have a 5.5% rate with 5.5% inflation, there's no restriction. But with inflation at 3%, now we have 2.5% of restriction. That's the real rate, they call it R squared. Okay. But so as the inflation rate drifted down, the R squared is going up and it's saying, oh no, we've got to cut rates before this, restriction causes a collapse. And I'm saying the fiscal impact of the rates is going up. And it's like 10 times higher than the monetary side, the difference between borrowers and savers. So as the inflation rate is coming down, even if the deficit stays at 7%, adjusted for inflation, it's gone up. So it's gone up from like 2 or 3 to 4 or 5, over the last 6 months. if the inflation indicators are correct, I'm not saying that. So, but the argument that the Fed's using to say, this is an emergency, we better cut rates because we're tightening so quickly. To use that, use their numbers, and in the better argument that said, hey, the deficit spending is going up, after inflation by that much, you better, things are going to get stronger, not weaker. Okay, so that's been another effect over the last 6 months. Yeah.
What's your position on just removing the Fed's ability to do anything with the rates?
Well, okay, somebody has to do it. So we could have a congressional committee set rates or something. Would they do anything differently? Probably not. They might. They all don't like inflation, and they have to make a point of it, or else they can't get elected. They all believe raising rates. That's why it's a deadly innocent fraud. They might have had rates at 7 or 8% now to make sure they get reelected. Who knows? That they're really hard on inflation, not like this wimp Fed doing more of a point. Maybe not. Maybe they would have been, appointees from the president or something who want lower rates so we could win the other. Who knows? It's something that's always being kicked around.
Thanks, please. I do believe that a lot of points making here on the panel. I just want to be ready for my more. I think it's both of each. So let me explain. So in my quote, there is the substitution in the income effect. What and problems with too much, if they put too much importance on the substitution effect, no one could seriously into that of substitution. Doesn't happen. And that's what this key models, for instance, rely on. On the other hand, what you're saying is there's an income channel, and you should take this more seriously. One could also say that there is the cost channel of monetary policy. I don't know what you think. Maybe played a role in the 70s. But you see that when the Fed increased the rates in the mid-70s, there was an increase in inflation right at that.
Yeah, that's what I was talking about before that I was going to here. But the whole cost structure goes up. That's part of forward pricing.
Yeah.
And if you want to buy a house, it takes a year to build it. That's all built in. Everything's built in. Inventory, cost of holding inventory goes up. Price.
Right. So the income and the gains are inflationary.
Yeah. All points in the same direction.
Okay, now that all other channels so let me just say two. The first one is credit channels. So just the fact that people cannot borrow so easily for housing, for instance, for the working lending.
So let's talk about that credit channel. You go into a bank and let's say you're the economy. They say, I want to borrow money. And the banker looks at you and says, well, interest rates are a lot higher. So that works against you. But your income's even higher. So that works for you. So the economy itself becomes more creditworthy. And you'll see, like even after 79, borrowing shoots back up. You get a lull because there lags, and they're winners and losers. It's very, very disruptive, very regressive.
Yes, then the people who want to borrow on the monetary market with higher income on the interest.
Yeah, it's not it's not the same people.
Yeah.
I understand. So it's lumpy, it's bumpy, as they call it.
And the other channel is the asset price channel.
Which one?
The asset price channel, when you increase interest rates, it reduces almost immediately for mathematical reason the bond valuations.
Oh, your valuations change.
Yeah.
Wait, so you have the stock market, and there's two things. So valuation and earnings. So the first thing that happens is see rates go up, the valuations cause the stocks to go down. But then the earnings go up, so then they go up even higher. So look at what happened in nominal terms to the stocks in Argentina from inflation. Just crazy. Why? In real terms, they're still not up there.
Right. But just bonds, existing bonds, the interest,
but yeah,
existing bonds doesn't go up.
but it's right where it was. So those people don't gain. But they just have a lot of money coming in, their new money is at the high.
Their equity is reduced. I mean, this is the trigger for financial crisis.
Their deposits reduced.
Their equity, the equity fund that.
Well, yes, there are people who are mismatched, who have different durations on assets and liabilities, and will lose money in a lot of business. The real estate investment trusts, all leveraged people are going to lose. And banks used to lose on that. Some still do. The bank regulation changed that, maybe in the late 80s, 90s. So American banks, at least, are not permitted to have insured investment, on interest rate sensitivity. They might still do it and not get caught, I understand all that. But across the board, you see bank earnings going up, not down. And so, it's not that some banks have closed down or gone out of business, but at the macro level,
depending on the relative prominence of those trends, don't you think that sometimes the increasing rate interest is fast enough could actually trigger recessive forces?
yeah, it could short term. So I waited it didn't, but it could have. That couldn't have been the case, but it didn't. And even in commercial real estate, I've been reading about how this huge crisis coming into this hasn't happened. No deal with it.
All right.
It's not a sure thing, I agree. But if you have enough time, it's throwing enough trillions of dollars of new income out there. Somebody gets it, and somebody, the next generation is far ahead, right?
Last question.
Thank you. I'll tell you with TV going up and the economy is booming. Now, see, there's some similarities between the US value and last and Britain in as much as we've been massively deindustrialised, that the financial sector seems to be like the cause of a lot of this growth. Now, the financial sector, a lot of their financial instruments are debts held by the populace, that the asset prices are going up, which means that you've got mortgages going up, but your rent. So individuals' mortgages are going up, and the rent prices are going up. So we might have a banner figure of a huge GDP. However, the amount of money held by millions of ordinary people that they can actually spend into the economy goes down. So I don't know.
The word I use is obscenely regressive. Is that not strong enough? It's horrible. No, I'm totally against the policy.
I'm struggling with the word booming then.
I'm against this policy. That means it's going up. The numbers are going up, but there's winners and losers. Rolls-Royce has, a 4-year backlog or something? Private jets flying into these green conferences. You can't get a parking thing. There's winners and losers here. It would make Reagan and Thatcher blush at how much they've gotten away with on this distribution. It's completely out of control. This is just added. So yeah, I don't disagree. But overall, total sales have gone up. That's called booming. Jobs, plenty of jobs, and younger people are the real income getting better off than they were before? Probably not.
Because people are selling their blood though.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think
And it's only just getting started. Who's your margin? Not what was
that's something that gets missed at the one sometimes. Because some people really say that, they think, Warren's saying, everything's great.
Yeah.
You know?
The free people.
Yeah, exactly.
There's 7 companies.
That's it.
You got the stuff. But the total was great. I told this story before. It was the first time in England there were these water faucets. You had one hot, one cold. Right? I just wondered why I should ask. Somebody mentioned Charles Goodman before. He was up there with me. And I was teasing Charles about it. He says, yes, we knew that to make the point of what averaging really means.
That's very glad to make everybody. Let's say that's the word. Just to Zahid, anybody's what if you purchase something? Oh, you already did? Okay. Interesting.
But the deadly innocent ones are the ones that are doing intense damage, and I would give them the idea of innocent fraud is you're giving them calling them innocent is more damning than not innocent, because if they know this,